But as when you read it, actually the Lord Jesus is pouring himself into these 12 guys.
Yeah.
He gives his best to that small team. Of course he gives his best to the crowds as well, don't get me wrong. Of course he preaches magnificently, but actually the focus of the Gospels, the crowds are the backdrop, the focus is on them.
Well, hello and welcome to the Church Office Podcast. My name is Gavin Smith, and it's a joy today to welcome you to the Church Admin and Ops Podcast. We love talking about leadership. We love talking about the local church and how we can build teams, how we can support staff, how we can serve leaders. We love all those kind of topics. And if you've been listening to the podcast, then you'll have a number of podcasts to go back through. I think we've got 105 podcasts now, which is kind of crazy to look back on. And each conversation is just great. And today's special guest is Ray Evans. You've been on the podcast before, mate, and dear friend of ours. So yeah, great to have you on today, mate.
Thank you. Real privilege. Thank you for asking.
It's brilliant. And we're going to be kind of drawing and learning from Ray as we talk about teams today. That's our topic. And before we get into our conversation, I just want to do a big shout out to Church Suite, who are the sponsors of our podcast, and Gavin at the team there have been so generous and kind to get behind the church office, and we appreciate their support. But the support that they offer churches is fantastic. The database, the software, the online cloud system, the database, all the different modules that you can use, whether it's kids, whether it's DBSs, whether it's small groups, rotas. This really equips a church office with the tools that you need to really do an effective job. Brilliant at communication. There's just a whole host of things, and they just make it better. Every month they make it better. Every month they're putting effort into making it training available or thinking about new ideas, new modules. So go and check them out at churchsuite.com. Ray, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're the leadership consultant, aren't you, at the FIC?
Yes, yeah, I've been working not short of 10 years nearly now.
Wow.
A couple of days a week I'm freed up to help leaders and their teams. There are other people on staff that work with smaller churches. There are others that give like pastoral crises support. But my role is mainly to support leaders and their teams, trying to help leaders who may have not had any formal training in an organization or running small teams. And that's a joy and a privilege. And a lot of it is born out of, I got so much so wrong for so long here in Bedford. Learned the hard way. Before I worked for the FIC, I was lead pastor of a church in Bedford for 40 years. I retired about 3 years ago. So the last few years, I worked both for my church and for FIC. And I suppose learning the hard way, in some ways you learn the lessons well, don't you? If it's just taken for granted, you perhaps don't understand quite how did this develop, why did this develop, why is it important. But we went from a small church where I was the sole pastor, just about could afford my salary. When I finished, we were a church, well, we're now a church of over 600 and a staff team, and I finished with 16. So going from sort of one pastor through lots of sort of different sizes, and then working with different team dynamics, both in leadership and then all the way through the church. You being in one place for so long, you live with the consequences of your decisions, for good and ill. And that perhaps is it's rarer today. We're not like in British management where somebody comes in, changes everything, and then scarpers before all problems arise. We're not like that. We've been one place a long time, and in the kindness of God, perhaps learned a few things. So yeah, my job is to support leaders. I don't go around as a guru with all the answers, but more to just help them think through some of the issues that they may be unfamiliar with.
And you're right, you touched on a great point to start, Ray, just about how theological training doesn't necessarily give you the kind of organizational training, does it? And the leadership gift that you need to build teams, to work in the church, to manage the finances, manage some of the operations and admin that we love and we talk about. You don't get as equipped, do you, as a leader in that aspect? And I think people are hungry to learn more on this kind of topic.
Yeah, I think what some of it is flowing from our understanding of what a Christian leader is. We have defined, and it's a good way of defining it, as pastor teacher. So look at that list in Ephesians, and the Lord Jesus has given some to pastors and teachers. We go, okay, I'm not an apostle, I'm not a prophet, I'm not an about, but I am a pastor teacher, and
Yeah.
that's me, pastor teacher. And you go, yeah, that's good as far as it goes, but it's not the only thing the New Testament says. And
Yeah.
we've filled into that one descriptor, pastor stroke teacher. We've sort of pushed into that. Well, that's the job then. You know,
Yeah.
it's as if it's
Mm.
the job description, and it isn't. And I think it's taken a while to recognize, perhaps better to think of New Testament church leaders mirroring Christ as in his three great offices: prophet, priest, king. So we don't bring new words, but we do open his word.
Yeah.
Um, Priests, we represent God to people and people to God. We have compassionate hearts.
Yeah.
He is that great gentle high priest, and so we're to be gentle priests. But there's then this thing about kingly leadership. Now, I think again, perhaps part of the negativity with that is that feeling that kingly leaders are bound to be sort of egomaniacs who just impose their will, and go, no, he isn't like that, is he? He's the most wonderful kingly leader. And we need to mirror some of that. And once you start thinking of, do you mirror him in terms of your servant leadership?
Yeah.
You know, you are there as leading the flock of God, overseeing it all. Once you begin to think like that, you go, okay, yeah, pastor teacher is an aspect of my job, but it's not the whole.
Yeah.
And then you begin to realize that actually in our formal training, we do give a lot of help to handle the word of God correctly, the prophetic, if I can say.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of work on like handling people and the complexities of, you know, divorce and mental health and bereavement and all the good and the challenging of people's personal lives. But we have very little input into well, when we look at leadership, we often tend to look at it personally. Are you a humble leader? Or, you know, are you a godly leader? And that's right. But we don't actually look at what are we trying to lead? Or,
Yeah.
you know, we're not looking at, we don't often do much about the organization, if I can call it that.
Yeah.
We tend to think of the church primarily theologically, the bride of Christ or the redeemed people of God or whatever. But we don't think of it as, yeah, but these are a group of people that need some structures and so on.
Yeah.
And I came to that late in the day.
Yeah.
It was a steep learning curve because for the 40 years I was working, maybe mostly 20 years, I was pretty much on my own.
Mm.
And I didn't understand quite the importance of teams
Yeah.
and then how to organize them well. Yeah.
Yeah. That's so helpful. And I think talking about kind of leadership and training, I was speaking to a pastor last week who said to me that he was so glad that he went into the workplace early on in his 20s, that some of the things that he learned, you know, about people, about structures, about processes, that as he came into leadership at that kind of later years, sort of the end of his 30s, he had such a wealth of kind of knowledge and experience to bring to the church. And I think often you find a lot of leaders who come straight out of uni, have a sense of call, want to get into the ministry fairly early on, and actually there's that kind of that gap, isn't there, of you know, just real life experience and how the world works, and that almost that credibility of being in the workplace and having, you know, a horrendous boss actually helps you in pastoral ministry, doesn't it? It's those things that actually can really form us as leaders, and it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of my close friends, he's almost saying, look, you know, I wouldn't appoint somebody until they've had some time out in the workplace
Yeah.
for those reasons, really. Now that and he's stretching a point, he's trying to sort of make a point, and that, you know, there's no kind of one size fits all, but there is a lot of wisdom. You know, even the qualifications got to be well spoken of by outsiders.
Mm.
Well, most of the outsiders who are going to speak well of you are your colleagues, the people who work with you,
Yeah.
the people you work for, the customers you serve, the team and you do learn huge amounts from handling people and relating to people. And also you'll learn, companies are not, there's some of them are very smart, they're very thought through, and we tend to think of, anything that the non-Christian does, it's got to be tainted with evil. Well, look, everything is tainted with evil, but there's a lot of God's good grace in all around us, and we can learn from all kinds of organizations, and we don't just learn it theoretically. If we've learned it through hard graft, and we can sometimes see the mistakes. I've got a friend who he worked as a manager in the NHS. Now, typically managers in the NHS have got a very bad press. They're regarded as complete waste of space bureaucrats, but actually without good managers, the A&E departments would just crash. They would, he could see the difference good management made to the performance of an A&E department, and he learned both the bad and the good. And it stood him great stead in the church. When he's now a pastor, full-time pastor in the church.
And I think these are things, isn't it? I think about Moses as I was reading through. I'm a big fan of Exodus 18, and I was just that thought of how God forms us before he calls us, so just think about Moses, that he grew up in a household where there was a leader of a nation, and what must he have seen and experienced and got to know in that place that God had placed him, and just thinking about what he must have learned about leadership from Pharaoh. And it's just fascinating that those things actually form. I could look back on my own career in sort of the Welsh government or in football, and I've learned so much about teams and about life and about policy and all these kind of things just from what I was involved in. And at the time, you think, I'm not sure why I'm doing this, but it leads to something else, doesn't it? And I think that's the story of it.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. You think of Moses leading, and it's hard to know exactly how many people he was leading, but probably in the low millions. If you ask most people, go and lead something with several million people, you'd absolutely freak out. You would not touch it. It's hard enough leading a family of, husband, wife, and 4 kids, let alone a nation of 3 or 4 million. But he'd seen it. So although the task, because he was a humble man, he wasn't like, I can do this easy, but it didn't freak him out. It wasn't outside of like, well, I've never even thought about anything like this. He'd seen it happen. And he could see the good and the bad. He'd seen the ruthlessness of the slave drivers, but he'd also seen, the brilliance of how, Egypt had harnessed its greatest natural asset, the Nile, and built a civilization. And he'd seen that, he'd lived in it, and he breathed its air. So when he was then leading the people of God, it wasn't all completely new, and he wasn't inept.
It's interesting, isn't it, that forming of character, that forming of leadership. All of that goes on, and that, and I love that. And you touched on it at the start, isn't it? Moses didn't lead out of that strength. He led out of that weakness. And it was through, even in our own weaknesses, and you're saying yourself, things that you've learned along the way. Nobody runs at this today of building either staff teams or teams in your church with strength, is it? You can read the books, you can read the theory, but you're working with people. And actually, it's not as easy as it looks, is it? And you do make mistakes and weakness.
And I think, for the first off, we all need help. There's none of us that don't. We all need help, and you can get help from colleagues, you get help from other people's experience, you get help from books, you get help from insights in the scriptures. There's all kinds of aids, but then there's no copy and paste. There's no sort of do it like this, it's bound to work. Every situation is different. I came across a very helpful book actually. I wish I'd read it years ago. It came out in 2019, just as I was coming towards the end of my working career, called Lead. And in it, they make the brilliant point that we are not on land with a map. Because on land with a map, you basically follow sat-nav and you get there. And if you haven't got there, you just must be stupid. You're not following the instructions, you dummy. Whereas we're not. If you realize, no, we're at sea. And every boat is different from every other boat. Every crew is different. The tide and the wave conditions, the wind, we're all different. So we can learn principles about sailing, but it's no good comparing my boat to your boat. You might have a 4-masted schooner, and I've got a rowboat. You can't compare.
Yeah.
And that's where you learn the principles, but actually every person, every church situation will require humility and wisdom,
Yeah.
because you may be facing threats I'm not, you may have advantages I've not got, you may have personnel on board that are, I wish I'd got a best mate like yours kind of thing. I haven't.
Yeah.
So I think that's, once you learn that, it helps a lot. I think some people have looked to leadership material as if this is the silver bullet that will solve all the problems. And you go, no, this will help you sail better,
Yeah.
help you navigate better, but you still, your ship, your crew, your tide, your wind is different from anybody else's. And so don't go into the comparison games of look how well we're doing or how badly we are. Just say, look, I've got to navigate what's in front of me now. Can I learn? And I think what was fascinating about, you mentioned Moses, you and I have talked about this before. For all his skills, he still needed Jethro to come and point out some obvious things he was missing. Because however gifted and skilled you are, you've not got everything in your toolkit. None of us is the whole thing.
Yeah.
And in essence, what the New Testament points this out very obviously by saying the word elder is always in the plural. There's a team of leaders that lead churches, because not one man has got all that's required. And I think once we pick that up, we go, yeah, we're all learners, we're all lifelong learners, and we're all, learning to navigate better the choppy seas. And every now and then, the wind blows and all of a sudden we find ourselves going faster. And that's very exciting. But to do that, we always need a crew.
Yeah.
It's not solo navigation around the world. It isn't that at all. No.
Absolutely right. And the whole idea of the ship thing is great as you talk about teams, isn't it? Because what do you need on board? It's our elders that set vision and direction. So where are we going? We want to hear that from our elders. But the teams on board that make it happen, the maintenance and the food and the health and safety and all the sleeping arrangements, all the things that go into running a ship are done in multiple teams, aren't they? Where there is, clear leadership structure, isn't it? There's a clear protocol to follow. On board ships, and there's a reason for that, isn't it? And you do need those, and there's a diversity of those different teams and gifts. But the key thing in all of this, isn't it, as we start talking about teams, is it's about leadership, isn't it? That starts with, good teams have good leaders in them, isn't it? And that is the truth straight away.
Yeah. If you just throw a bunch of sinners together, naturally speaking, it's going to go wrong, isn't it? I mean, so actually, what does God do to help us? Well, he gives us a lot of grace. The gospel gives us a lot of grace to love one another and help one another and serve one another. But we still could go around aimlessly unless we have some kind of help with, as you say, vision, direction. And so it's fascinating in the New Testament that when Paul and Barnabas, on their return journey and their first missionary trip, they appoint elders in all the churches. They don't just leave them as like, well, try and get on with each other. They give them elders to protect, to provide, to envision. And that is normal Christianity. A church would normally have, now in exceptional circumstances, it might be a time of persecution, or it could be a time of, there are not many people in the church after a difficult period or whatever. But normally speaking, the usual expectation is, as Paul wrote to the church of Philippi, he wrote, to the church with the elders and deacons. That's the kind of normal New Testament structure. You've got leaders who envision, you've got servants that enable the work to go forward, you've got the regular committed members who've, as it were, nailed their color to the mast and said, look, I'm a Christian, I'm committed to this local church, and I'm going to help my brothers and sisters. That's normal. So leadership is built in as a normal expectation. And each team then says, well, it's wise to have leaders of teams. As you pick out, the key thing is, well, what does leadership look like when you're talking about teams?
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, because you can't just administrate teams, can you?
No.
You can't just set them up and then off you go. Teams are effective because there's leadership, because there's somebody who's going, I'm gonna bring some servant leadership and some direction to this and some purpose, really, aren't we? And we're the church office has got kind of 3 C's of teams, Ray, and we chatted about this before, kind of clarity, care, and consistency. And those are 3 things that you want. And clarity is so important, isn't it? You've read the leadership books.
Yeah.
Clarity, clarity.
Yeah. Pat Lencioni's book called The Advantage was all about it. If you want a healthy organization, a healthy church, it's about clarity. Each chapter, clarify your vision, then re-clarify it, and then visit clarity all over again. It's a book about, and you're right, it is important, this thing about clarity. In our teams here at church, we use a thing called the CARE plan. It's an acronym, but it starts with clarify the mission. Every time the team meets, revisit, what are we doing? Why are we doing what we're doing? Start with the why, clarify the mission, and leaders enable a team to remember where we're going, why we're doing what we're doing. Because if you don't do that, it becomes humdrum, it becomes routine. It might end up with a lot of squabbles even. But if you clarify the mission, you go, yeah, we are part of something massive that the Lord Jesus is doing. We've been called to join his mission. We're not doing mission for him. We're joining him in his mission. And once that gets you excited, that gets you up for it. That's where you start. Well, what is, no sacrifice I can make is too great for him who gave everything for me. And that motivates a team. And leaders help clarify mission. I think the way they do that's important. I think sometimes we can have leaders and teams, but if we're not careful, leaders, if they've not thought about what Christian servant leadership looks like, 2 things will happen. One is they become overly dominant and tell the team, or they see servant as passive and I'm just here. Well, you don't want either. You don't want either of those. You want the servant leader says, look, these team meetings are some of the most important things I can give my attention to. And I want them to be as good as they possibly can. And when we come to clarify mission, I'm not the only one with insight. I might remind the team of the vision that's been, the Lord Jesus has given us, the elders have set for us, but all can chip in. And the way best to chip in is let's tell some stories about people's lives that our team is touching. And let's pray for some of those people. Whatever team you're in, you'll be touching people's lives. And a leader can get those stories being told and heard. Because some people might think, well, I bet this bloke, and it's not important, I won't mention it. Whereas a leader could say, like, come on, John, who could you share about that our team can pray for? And then John would say, well, I wasn't going to say anything, but I met this guy, John, and actually our team touched his life. And since then he's been reading a Christian book or whatever it is. And I think that's where leaders understand the way they serve the team is to keep the structure of where, how the meeting's going. We'll talk about that in a moment. But it's enabling other voices to be heard as well. So the team together generates under God, revisits its vision and its mission, and then begins to discuss, agree on goals. What can we practically do? How are we going to do it? Who's going to do it? When's it going to be done by? Let's review how we did last time. Let's do some review, and finally, let's equip the team. How can we do some training? Can we listen to a Gavin Smith podcast? There we go. What could we go to a conference together? Could we go out for a curry and just spend some time having some fun time? There's all ways of, the leader doesn't need to tell the team everything that the leader wants to happen. The leader's job is to just keep on steering the team, getting the voices heard. And then the power of the leader, if you like, is the power of a good summary. The leader keeps the agenda going, keeps the team on target, keeps team reminding, look, it's time to have an honest review. Come on, we didn't, last time we worked, it didn't go so well as it could have done, did it, team? Come on, let's feed back to. A leader keeps those conversations going in a kind of structured way. and the team contributes. So at the end of the day, you know, together everyone achieves more than you'd ever do individually.
Yeah.
And the leader's job is to enable that to happen. And that's a very exciting thing to be in a team like that, where a leader has given some of their best energy, time, skill to enable the team to really function as a team. So again, Pat Lencioni did a very powerful talk, 2019, it's a bit dated now, but he talked about two kinds of leaders. And he started his talk with this ominous, I don't like the phrase servant leader. And of course, there was this sharp intake of breath. I mean, what do you mean? And he said, because it implies there are other kinds of authentic leadership and there are not. All authentic leadership is servant leadership. That he said, well, the other type of leader that is inauthentic is what he called reward leader.
Okay.
And reward leaders, like, what are you getting out of this? What are you doing and what are you getting out of it? Well, in the world, it might be promotion, salary, corner office, knighthood. In the church, it could be more on the platform, more recognition in some way or other. You're never going to get paid much money and you're not going to get a knighthood, but it just might, you're more important now. And he said, you've got to be wary of reward leadership. And one of the things he particularly pointed on was this thing about teams. And reward leaders see teams as a bit of a necessary evil. Okay, it's got to happen. Oh, can we get it over with as quickly as possible so that I can get back to what I'm important for? And that's very significant. How many leaders resent, oh, I've got an elders meeting tonight. Oh, I've got a team meeting tonight. And really think, oh, I wish we didn't have them. Oh, I wish I could get over with quickly because it's not that important. And Lencioni put his finger on that and said, the most important thing a leader can do is to enable the teams he works in to sort of do as well as they possibly can. A good leader recognizes these small meetings of teams are the most important things he does. And he puts his whole best into them. And again, looking back on the Lord Jesus, we would have written it like, well, the Lord Jesus really prepared that sermon for the 5,000, it took a long time. But when you read it, actually, the Lord Jesus is pouring himself into these 12 guys. He gives his best to that small team. Of course, he gives his best to the crowds as well. Don't get me wrong. Of course, he preaches magnificently, but actually the focus of the Gospels, the crowds are the backdrop. The focus is on the way that the servant leader poured himself into team and gave them his very best. And when you get leaders like that in churches, when you teach leadership like that, they give their very best to the teams they serve. You go, okay, we're on it. This is the right direction to go in. Yeah.
Absolutely right. That's good. And I think we have seen some changes, haven't we, in churches, from rota cultures to team culture. And I think, more and more people are just starting to see, what you're talking about, Ray. Training leaders, having a leadership pipeline where we can invest in our leaders who go and invest in these teams. And even just having a little bit of structure like that, we've seen churches. And I was working with a church a couple of weeks ago who have established who would be in quite a traditional elders and deacons church, but established a team network, and they appointed team leaders to every team, and then gave them the scope of saying, we want you to get together a couple of times a year. We want you to have food together. We want you to pray together. We want you to build friendship. Actually, you're, as a team leader, responsible for caring for these people as almost like a first layer of just pastoral care. And caring for the team is great. And I just love what you said about connecting stuff to vision helps you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I just love that point. And we make it a lot with the church office. If we can help people see that they're contributing to a team that's making a difference for the gospel, there's life in that, isn't there? There's joy in that. There's motivation in that. You're not having to drag the team along
No.
because they see it and they get it and they're playing a part, and we can help. We have to connect people, don't we, to that vision piece or to that gospel piece and say, you're on the camera team. This is the difference it makes. Kids workers aren't hearing the sermon unless you are doing this job, and you just think it's just something I just do on a Sunday.
Yeah.
Actually, you're part of a team that makes a difference for our church, and people don't make those connections, do they? Particularly
No. If you just have as you said, you mentioned this thing of rotas to teams. Many churches I come across think they've got teams when what they've got are rotas.
Yeah.
And you say, like, tell me about that. Well, I serve. I've been on it for 15 years, and who else is in the team? Well, I don't really know because I just do my bit when I'm on the rota. Okay, we're not got a team at all. We've got rotas, and many churches. I mean, there is a thing. I mean, there's a place for rotas. Don't get me wrong, but rotas and teams aren't the same thing. A team stands away from what it delivers and talks about what it delivers. But you're absolutely right. If you don't start with vision and clarifying that, it will become routine, humdrum, and energy-less over time. I often tell this, I think, you'd have heard me tell this story of a toilet cleaner was asked by President Kennedy what he did. And he said, I'm part of a team that puts a man on the moon. He was a janitor at NASA. Now, I think that story's apocryphal. I chased it all the way down through the internet rabbit holes. I think it's apocryphal, but it illustrates brilliantly.
Yeah.
And you'll know there are certain shop chains that you go, the staff are clearly well trained. They understand the vision of the whole. They aren't just, oh, you're another customer. Oh, I wish we didn't have you. They give themselves, well, that the whole vision of the company, they're gripped by that. And that whole thing of vision. Now, if the world we can do it far, far, because we are part of a team under God that we're putting people in heaven. It's, this the stakes could not be higher.
Yeah.
And I remember C.S. Lewis years ago writing, he said, look, during the day, you will set your eyes on people that will one day be so gloriously wonderful you'd almost worship them, or such a horror that you'd abhor. He said, never think that you're just people. People are, just destined for, and under God, you can make a difference. And to be part of a team that puts people in heaven, to be part of a team that enables people to keep going on their journey. And once you start telling those stories, most Christians, that they will get excited about that, because they realize that it isn't just pushing buttons or clearing up spilt orange juice or, filling in accident forms. It's all part of something that serves people made in God's image and people who could one day be so glorious by God's grace. And then the serious side of it, or actually, if we don't, now look, we believe in God's sovereignty, where God is in control, but humanly speaking, Paul talked about wanting to win people to Christ, as many as possible. He recognized the stakes were high. He knew it wasn't in his own power. The evil one blinds the minds of unbelievers. He knew it was in a spiritual war. But you need to remind Christians in teams that even when they're doing the camera, we're part of a spiritual warfare outfit. We are. Everything we do, the evil one will try and disrupt it and destroy it. He will get Christians against Christians. He will do anything he can.
He persuades you, I don't need to be part of this team today. I'm not needed in a team. I'm not wanted in the team. All those things.
Everything he can to ruin it. And when it works, it's beautiful. But it's also in some ways fragile and robust at the same time. Fragile, good teams can soon become not so good teams, but it doesn't need much. A little bit of pride, a little bit of jealousy, a little bit of envy, a little bit of frustration, and a team can become, oh, not so lovely,
Yeah.
but robust in the sense that, God's children want to serve
Yeah.
because that's what Jesus did. If we're not serving, then we're not becoming like Jesus. And most times we serve with other Christians.
Yeah.
So we don't, we do serve on our own, obviously, but most of the time when we serve alongside others.
That's true. Ray, just as you were talking, I was just thinking about a baptism we had a couple of months ago. And those times where you get to hear the story and the testimony of somebody. I just love it to, on a Monday morning, to be able to write to someone on the welcome team and say, do you know what you featured today, didn't you, in this testimony, that someone came and they said, I was so welcome that I just couldn't forget it. I went home and I thought, oh my goodness, I could go back to that place and not even be a Christian and be safe there and be known there and be liked there. And that story came through in a testimony, and you're able to kind of link up the team leader and say, like, make sure you remind the team and thank the team because you're part of that person's story. And you might think it's just an insignificant thing because it was the first Sunday, but that is so significant, isn't it, in what God is doing in that person's life. And so the testimonies that we hear, I just love it when it leads back to a team. I'm almost jumping up and down in my chair going, this is God's plan, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the privileges of being in a place a long time.
Yeah.
I saw lots of these quite long journeys to faith. The average journey time from someone meeting a Christian to becoming a Christian can often be about 10 years.
Yeah.
And when you get that, when you see those long journeys to faith, and then the journey of faith once you become a Christian, you realize that that first welcome, if that had gone badly wrong, there may have never been another step in the journey. And that makes what Paul says, about the way the body works. The things we think are less important, we give them extra. In the church, the people who welcome people are some of the most important people in the church.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we think, well, of course they can't. But you go, yeah, because people decide whether to come back to a church in the first 7 minutes of coming into the car park.
Yeah.
So it's nothing to do with the preacher. They've already made their mind up.
Yeah.
And why is that? Well, the welcome, the care, the love, the atmosphere they sensed. And all the things we think aren't that important. We all know, obviously, if the sound system team aren't working very well, the whole thing is a complete disaster. What a difference a few decibels on the switch makes. If it's too loud, too soft, everything God uses, and the kindness of God is, look, he can use us with all our weaknesses and mistakes, but those little things matter. You think back when the Apostle Paul, newly converted, went to Jerusalem and everybody was suspicious of him except Barnabas. And you think, what if Barnabas had been like everybody else? What would have happened if Barnabas hadn't been that son of encouragement that welcomed Paul in? You think, well, we all look back and you read the story backwards. Well, of course God put him there. He did. But, Barnabas was someone who took care of new people. And he went against the natural grain of being suspicious about this former persecutor. He was the one that welcomed Paul in. Now, if he hadn't given Paul that welcome, who knows? And that's the thing about history. You can't repeat it. You can't say, let's do that again. You get this one go. So at home in our own church, we try and say every team matters, because every time we meet, the stakes are so high. And we all know from our own experience, we often use this at church, say, when you go on holiday, does the church you visit think it's welcoming? And they was, yes. Did you find it welcoming? No. Inevitably.
It's always a disconnect.
It's always like, they think they're welcoming, but did you find it very welcoming? No, nobody talked to me. Nobody invited me back. I mean, a dad of 4 kids. I think we got asked out for a meal once, and we almost fell over with astonishment that a church where we were visiting on holiday said, "Well, why don't you stay for lunch?"
Yeah,
But those little things matter,
yeah,
and teams.
yeah,
Once teams recognize that they are, as it were, treading on holy ground all the time, everybody they meet, everything they do
yeah,
matters to God, and God uses those little things. And I love hearing the stories of when people become Christians. In fact, we video them now,
yeah,
and we find that people, when they're videoed, they say things they might not if they were put in front of a big audience and
yeah,
are too nervous.
yeah,
And they'll say things like, "Well, yeah, I found the person who gave me the cup of coffee, the lady in the creche. She was so kind." One of our converts, she had a very complex background. She eventually got so desperate that the health visitor said, "Look, I want you to go to the food bank." And she said, "I was too ashamed. I waited 3 weeks, but I was so hungry after 3 weeks. I thought, I've got to go to the food bank." And she said, "I was absolutely dreading it. And the smile I got from the first person I met,
brilliant.
and if I
Brilliant.
tell you, her background was so difficult and complex, but that was the first step that led to her marvelous. I mean, she'd become a Christian. She's still going on with Christ. I saw her yesterday, but it was the smile of she was expecting a frown and a tut tut, and she got a warm welcome. And she had a very messy, complex background, and that was the step. And you think, well, without that step, there would have not been any of the other steps.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
when teams meet, they need to talk about that, because if they don't, they'll think, "Oh, my team is not like the preachers. They're really important." You go, "No, no, no.
Yeah. Yeah,
It don't work
absolutely
like that."
right.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. Because people belong to teams sometimes before they belong to the church, don't they? And we've seen, our church here is definitely shift. You can, if you're a regular attender and you've been coming along, we want to get you involved in the tea and coffee team, because you might not be a Christian. Now, we're not going to have unbelievers teaching on a Sunday morning. There are teams that are dedicated to this, but actually, yeah, people want to belong to something. And so if we have a team structure and we think about it in a team way rather than a rota or something that we just do, an invitation to a team is quite a powerful thing, isn't it? Let's be honest. Yeah, rather come and join my rota. No, come and be part of our team.
Yeah.
And here's our rest of our teammates. Here's what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. This is the success that we've had. This is what God's been doing through this team. And you're like, suddenly you become part of something.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that. And where there are team structures, that just works. And that kind of leads us on to the conversation about culture, doesn't it? And
Yes.
teams bring a life, don't they, in a culture in a church that sometimes you don't have. And you've definitely built that in what you've done, haven't you, in Bedford?
Yeah. So that thing you said there, you teams just don't automatically work. They've got to have this is how this team works in terms of its culture. This is the So, for example, I had a break from playing sport when we had our 4 little kids, and I was pastor of a church. I was very, very busy. But later in life, my sons started playing sport. And I was watching them and thinking, well, if I've got the time to watch, why don't I play? But actually, there was quite a big, like, "Oh no, I've been out of sport for so long. I'd be no good. Oh, I don't know anybody." Actually, it's quite daunting if you're not in a team to join a team.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
And it's
yeah,
same in church. If you move
yeah,
church and you go to a new church, or you become a new Christian, you join church, you're involved in a church, actually, you feel like, "Oh no, I can't join a team." So one of the great team culture things you need to set is our team welcomes new members.
yeah, yeah,
Okay. We actively welcome them. Because we recognize it's not easy to join a team. Teams can feel a little bit like a kind of circled wagons. They're all very good at this. They all know each other. It's a bit of a closed shop. I'll be useless. I won't join. In fact, churches often complain about core and fringe. You must have
yeah,
come across
yeah,
that.
yeah, all the
And they
time.
always moan, "Oh, the fringe don't get involved." But you think, do you know what? Have you ever been fringe? Do you know how hard it is if you go somewhere new,
Yeah,
you're the new boy, you don't know how it works. I went back. The way I got back into sport was my GP. He played in the team, and
yeah,
he welcomed me in. He introduced me to the others on the team. And he said, look, Ray hasn't played for about 15 years. And you could almost feel like, oh no, but they didn't. They welcomed me, and I've been playing in that team now for about 25 years.
Brilliant.
And I loved it. But it was those early, and you remind teams of this. Look, it's not easy. Sometimes people don't volunteer for teams because teams can feel a bit forbidding.
Mm.
And so one of the culture steps is our team welcomes new people. We have permission to join and leave teams.
Yeah.
This isn't a closed shop where you sign for life. You know, if you need to leave the team, that's fine. If you want to join a team, your circumstances. Now, some teams need some competencies like music, for example.
Yeah.
But again, we don't want to say, you know, you've got to be a concert pianist before we let you anywhere near the music team. We want to recognize that we're in about forming people.
Mm.
And again, the lovely thing about teams, you don't need all the competent. This is the lovely thing about team. If you look at what a team does, you know, I'm not very good at that and that and that and that. And you say you don't have to be. You're part of a team that does all this.
Yeah.
We even joke it in our church. You could hate children and be on the children's team because somebody needs to do the squash and the biscuits,
Yeah.
you know, and the tuck shop. And you don't have to be omnicompetent. And when teams recognize that and give new people a warm welcome, lovely to have you on board. Great you're here. Most people, when they join a team, feel like, oh, I'm not very good. I'm sure I'm not going to, you know, I'm going to disappoint you. A team culture of welcoming new people, a team culture of celebrating not what I do, but what we get to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
A team culture where we can be honest with each other, candid, but equally not like miffed when, as a team, we decide that we'll go with John's ideas, not Susan's ideas. That's fine. That kind of cabinet thing. And good leaders do that. They help that. So look, folks, the aim is to be really honest with each other, but all of us, including me, will sometimes find actually we go with, you know, as a team, as we work this through together, we might come to an answer that is not my particular like or dislike, but that's fine. You need a culture where people can be candid with each other, where every viewpoint is respected, where we never have a culture where we don't put anybody down, either in the team or outside the team. You know, we're not rubbishing other teams. They're important cultural things, and the leaders set the tone. So if someone breaks that team culture, you pick it up, not in a nasty way, but just say, look, no, we don't do that. You know, we don't put others down. We don't mock anyone. You know, we're not in a pecking order here. We've all got a point to play. Once that team culture is at work, Christians begin to go, do you know what? It's a joy to serve. For most Christians, it's a drudge. But when a team culture is working well, it's a joy to serve. And you realize that Paul, the apostle, he had enormous joy. You read Romans 16. Many people think, what's the point of Romans 16? All those names of people who are dead 2,000 years ago. But what it's saying is, now here is a man who enjoyed, look how many people he served with and how many people he endorsed and warmly commended. This guy is a team player. We think of Paul as the man on his own, the courageous individual. No, Romans 16 says Paul is a consummate team player and part of his culture. You read that one chapter, how many times, they served with me. I love them to bits, welcome. That's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And leaders set that tone of warm, endorsing, encouraging, affirmation of other Christians. It's quite rare.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is.
Unfortunately. But Paul sets a very high bar in Romans 16 of how wonderfully well he served with others. People, no wonder. You read Acts 20 when they all get together for the last time, when Paul says goodbye to the Ephesian elders. Now, when you read it, it's scary, from some of your own number, and it's quite a scary speech. And at the end, they all get down and they pray. and then they all bawl their eyes out because Paul is now. By that, most of us, if we were with a boss who'd given us a talk like that, we go, "Oh, great, he's left the company, you know, or he's left the church, he's gone somewhere else, great." But no, they knew they were loved, they were served, that Paul was saying things from his heart for their own good. They loved him deeply, even though he'd said some straight things, because he was the man who served them with love. And so the culture that Paul, as it were, but he had set and created under God, was one where people counted it a massive privilege to serve. And they're the kind of things that, you know, leaders help create and maintain: warm, godly, humble, joyful service. Yeah.
No, that's true. That's true, mate. Sorry, my phone was just ringing off there from a pastor chasing me up to. We did a back office review at a church, and he's saying, "Can I chat to you?" So, but mate, this is gold, isn't it? Because you are, you know, the team stuff really enables the church. You know, when we talk about kind of every member ministry and equipping the saints for ministry, you need some structure, don't you, to be able to do that. You know, we want to teach the word, we want to inspire people with what they're hearing from God's word, but we need an outlet where they can go and join somewhere and be part of something and to serve and feel like they're contributing. And I think for a bigger church that's listening, and I'm feeling that challenge myself, sometimes our standards can be so high in our teams and in what we want that we kind of exclude people. You know, we need really good people who can talk to people on the welcome team. And that's true, we do. But there are other people that can be part of that team. And there's a journey, isn't there, to helping people develop in their gifts. And if someone's got a real desire to be part of the welcome team, but they're not great necessarily, then as a team leader, what can you do to go and get behind them? How can you help them? Because part of this kind of serving and discipleship happens alongside each other, isn't it? So as we help them to talk to other people, they are being changed to become more like Christ, aren't they? And there's a discipleship aspect to it as well, isn't it? And I think, you know, helping team leaders and inspiring team leaders, saying that you're not there just to lead and to organize, but you're there to care, you're there to inspire, you're there to develop. And like you say, it's okay to go and lead another team. You know, if you've been on the Tea and Coffee team for 15 years, there's probably something wrong, isn't there, with that? You haven't been able to move people on into other roles. And that is a sticking point for churches as well, isn't it? It's getting stuck in a team role.
Yeah. I think some of that comes out of, or two things I think happen there. One is an overly controlling leadership sometimes puts people in teams. You know, the key leaders just make all the important decisions, and you are told that we want you to serve in this team. And I think that actually, in the longer run, that isn't healthy. I think in the short run, it sometimes kind of works, but I think it's best to say, look, treat others with great respect. You know, trust their judgment. If they say, look, I don't think that's me, but I'd love to serve over there, say, great. You know, we have a massive freedom of people joining and leaving teams because we want to treat them as, you know, responsible adults, if I can put it like that. But also, you're right. People's circumstances are changing all the time, and you want people to have freedom. Look, you know, a new baby, for example, or a child leaving home will change your opportunities. So we don't want people stuck. I think, again, some of the feeling in the past is a sense of duty, which was like, well, I said I'd be committed to this, so that's it for life. You know, and you think, no, that isn't. Teams aren't like that in the New Testament. They're constantly, again, you need your leaders to do some teaching on this. You find that Paul's teams are very fluid as circumstances change. Sometimes he's in a big team. In Acts, beginning of Acts 20, he lists all the men who are on that journey with him to Jerusalem with the gifts that the churches are sending. And it's a big team, representatives from virtually all the churches in Greece. So lots and lots of churches send money and lots of men go. Other times it's like just him and one other. You know, it's Barnabas and Paul, or it's Paul and Silas. Sometimes the teams grow, sometimes they're not. We want to create a culture where say, look, as your circumstances change, you don't feel duty does not mean stuck in this team forever.
Yeah.
And actually, if you do get stuck in a team, it becomes a bit like unlike the Sea of Galilee with water coming in, water going out.
Yeah.
It's a bit more like the Dead Sea, where the water just comes in and gets salty. And actually, that sort of, we want Christians, as you age, mature, and actually, you want to create some space for other people to learn and grow. So sometimes you need to say, I need to move out of this team simply to let somebody else blossom. And that will be true. I mean, I was a lead pastor, and I recognize I need to get out of the way so other pastors can blossom. And so in that sense, you model it from the top, but you also model it. And in that world, we all grow with the one anothering. And serving alongside one another is a wonderful way of growing as a Christian. And that's where discipleship is not merely a kind of personal you and the Lord Jesus thing. It is that, but it's you and other Christian thing.
Yeah, I love that.
And we disciple one another, you know, as we serve, and we learn what, you know, humility is. We learn what wisdom is. We learn what faithful prayerfulness is, alongside
other conflict on things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. How to be honest without being miffed. You know, how to put your point of view without necessarily getting your own way. Well, how do you learn that? Well, you learn that in teams. What a great way to learn. Yeah,
you do. Well, mate, we've come to the end of our time. There's so much there. I'm gonna have to listen to this 2 or 3 times just for my own benefit, just because teams are such a big part of it, isn't it? It's about working with people, and whether you've got 50 in a church, you need teams, and you're probably on multiple teams. As the bigger churches, you know, a church for us, we're finding it harder to find a place where everyone can serve on a Sunday. And so we're looking at how do we transition people from Sunday teams to midweek teams, and you know, and these seasons, and you start thinking about these things. We've got a whole bunch of people who are retiring. The leadership that we want to bring to that is, right, how can we use these more effectively? Are these guys leading teams? Can they lead teams in the daytime? You know, so again, hopefully people can listen into this and go, right, how can I reflect and benefit from this? And Ray, you've got so much experience, mate. I just love chatting to you. That's the thing. I could chat all day to Ray about leadership and organizational structure and how people work together. It's you're a joy to chat to, mate, and someone who's been there and done that. So thank you so much for sharing out your wisdom, mate.
No, that's very sweet of you to ask. Thank you for being so patient, like with my motor mouth. Once I got going, you're thinking, I need an off button. I
just love the passion, mate. You were brilliant, and our audience loved you last time you came on and talk about the Awkward Size Church, and to have you come on and talk about teens is wonderful. And if you've got a question for Ray or I, or you want to follow up, or you know, you'd like to access some of the services that the church office are doing, and maybe even access what Ray's doing through Reach Ministries and through the FIC, then would you get in touch? Feel free to get in touch. Your questions at thechurchoffice.co.uk. We would love to chat to you more and try and help you and serve your church. So please do get in touch, and we'll see you next time on the podcast. Thank you, Ray. Goodbye, everyone.